Welcome, Cinepals. I'm Jabby Kuwait, joined by ACHARA, KIRK.
What's up?
We are watching The Last of Us Episode 8, Breakdown, Hidden Meaning, and Easter Eggs Explained from Screen Crush. Thank you, Screen Crush, for allowing us to react to this. Very much appreciate it. Y'all, if you haven't already, do me a big favor. Hit that subscribe button, bell icon, all notifications, and pretty please vote this up. Let YouTube know you're enjoying what you're watching while you're subscribing and upvoting. Of course, subscribe to Screen Crush. There's a link in the description below. If you want to click on that, give the original video an upvote and subscribe to him from there. Let's jump into this. Here we go.
Silent breed is people!
Is that Charlton Heston?
Yeah. Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in The Last of Us Episode 8, When We Are in Need. So this episode had a lot of Easter eggs to the game, but I'm actually more impressed by what they added to the story. There's also a lot of allegory and biblical symbolism that I'm going to break down for you.
And I love his biblical symbolism.
Or at least a story point that I fundamentally disagree with that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. And there were also lots of hints that led up to that big twist. But first, let's get to those Easter eggs. The title of the episode, When We Are in Need, could be paraphrased from Hebrews 4:16. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace when we are in need of help. Now, the Bible actually has many passages about approaching God in times of both physical and spiritual need. In this show, there's a lot of needy people who need guidance and a strong protector, and Pastor Dave is here to take advantage of them to bolster his own ego and twisted worldview. So we start in Silver Lake, Colorado, which later on we're told is a resort.
It's not a real town name. It's a resort.
A resort?
And that is a really interesting turn of phrase because it allows us to make an immediate comparison to the other communities that we've seen. Fedra ruled Boston with an iron fist. Kansas City was essentially run by angry anarchists, while Jackson is an actual, real community where people work together. But Silver Lake is called a fake town, both because it's a resort, but it's also a community that is built on lies. This is not a real community of people who have banded together for a common goal. They follow Pastor Dave because they are afraid and want to be protected. And literally and metaphorically, they swallow the truth about what they actually are.
Wait, so what are they all so afraid of?
Well, zombies. But I also think that they're afraid of the truth. Despite what Pastor Dave says, I think that everyone knows that they are eating human flesh. And Pastor Dave allowed them to live this lie that they were eating deer meat.
What is it?
Venison.
Yeah.
The title of the episode is also reflected in the banner that hangs in the dining room, and that also hangs in the game. Now, we're made to think that this banner is talking about God, but consider that it's hanging up in the dining hall, and then we start to understand that it's actually referring to Pastor Dave and how he will provide human meat for everyone to eat. What'd you say?
What? I don't know. What did I say?
That human meat is tasty.
Yeah, man, human meat. Like the meat humans give me. Tasty.
Ah, okay.
So diabolical.
I hadn't thought about the possibility that actually everyone knew that they were eating human flesh, because I just thought that that underlying current of, I don't know what it was, just creepiness and like this feeling of being uncomfortable was because they were following a guy who was extremely volatile. And if you've ever like hung out with anyone who has a temper or is possibly physically abusive or anything like that, there's always that moment where they can turn, and it's just kind of like uncomfortable because you're like, is this the moment? Because you never know when they're gonna like suddenly lash out at you.
Maybe it's all of the things, all of the above.
Yeah.
The passage Dave is reading from is from the Book of Revelations. So if you're unfamiliar with the Book of Revelation, it's the final book of the Christian Bible, and it details a prophecy about how the world will end and be reborn. And it is weird. Like, the Bible's going along for a long time, telling a story about prophets and messiahs, disciples, like parables, and then all of a sudden at the end it turns into Twin Peaks directed by Michael Bay. Revelations is filled with imagery and symbolism and references that are best understood to a culture that existed 2,000 years ago. So its literal meaning has been debated by theologians, but one thing we all agree on is that it depicts the end of the world with some very bad things happening, lots of bloodshed, stuff like that, and then the world is reborn as a paradise. I'm actually surprised that more post-apocalyptic stories don't lean into this more. Like, post-apocalypse times would be a perfect time for a cult leader like Pastor Dave to take power by pointing to Revelations and saying, see, I told you so. Now, this particular passage from Revelation is after the world has been destroyed and after the beast has been cast back down into the pit, and when God and Jesus have returned to the earth. So in the context of the show, Dave is trying to say that now his flock lives in this time of paradise. The world has been destroyed, emptied out, so God could fill it with love again. Now later on, Pastor Dave shares his true perversion of this idea.
The cordyceps, it loves.
But more on that in a bit. Dave is trying to use this passage to control the grief of his people, telling them,
And God will wipe away all tears from their eyes.
Which, on first viewing, seems like a nice man trying to comfort a young girl. But in hindsight, he's telling her, shut up, don't cry. I'm your daddy now. The girl asks,
Can you bury him?
Literally.
And I think that she's asking because she knows, like everyone else knows, that they're eating human meat. She wants her dad buried and not eaten. But Dave lies.
The ground is too cold to dig. We'll bury your father in the spring.
Now, Dave's second in command, James, is played by Troy Baker, and Baker played Joel in the Last of Us video game. Now here, I do think that they talk in code to disguise their cannibalism.
Josiah and Martin think they spotted some deer the other night.
Now, I'm not sure whether they do this to protect the secret from the others or just to lie to themselves, but this coded language persists throughout the entire episode, like when he tells Ellie,
So I sent 4 of our people to a nearby town to scavenge what they could.
they sent people out to look for humans to eat. Hunger is also a driving motivation for Ellie. She's trying to help Joel get back on his feet, but they're down to what might be jerky? Like, I'm not really sure. So this drives her to grab his rifle and start hunting. The white rabbit she takes a shot at is straight from the game where she actually takes it. In fact, it's the opening shot of the winter stage of the game. But in the game, Ellie has to specifically say,
This won't last very long.
to motivate her to chase after the deer. But in the show, she doesn't have the rabbit to fall back on, so her need for the deer meat is even more desperate. It's a really good change. Just like in the game, she doesn't get the kill shot on her first try, so she chases after the deer. Although in the game, it takes much longer. Now there's another key change from the game. In the game, Ellie
A key change.
I don't know.
It's a music joke. So it's like, you know, when it's going in one key and then you change it and it goes a little bit higher.
Did you suspect that they were talking in code whatsoever? I did not.
No, I did not. But now that he mentions it, I'm like, oh, that is possible. I thought that maybe they were talking about actual deer, especially because we see Ellie go after a deer.
Right.
I thought that might be it. But that's actually even more twisted and sinister. But I feel like if you were eating people and you kind of knew that, then maybe the only way you can carry on is by pretending that you're not.
Right. I guess it lines up with his whole thing about the cordyceps because they're eating people, and so is this cult.
Right, but the cordyceps aren't eating themselves. They're eating people.
I feel like it all comes down to they're both grody melody, so.
Yeah, for sure.
But here, it's James and Pastor Dave. This is a great change because it lets us see these two men talk privately for a while, and it makes them seem more trustworthy.
I don't see anybody. You think we can just take it?
I mean, they're acting like they just found money on the street, but they're hoping someone comes back to claim it. One of the major themes in this episode is trust. Pastor Dave wants the trust of his flock, which is why he presses James for his support.
I sensed doubt in there.
They haven't lost faith in you, David. They're just scared.
Joel and Ellie trust one another with their lives. Ellie is tricked into trusting Pastor Dave. In fact, later in the episode, this theme of trust occurs when Joel is torturing people.
It's okay. No. I believe him. No.
That shot also taken straight from the game. But the most important trusting relationship in this episode is for the audience to feel like that we can trust Pastor Dave. So these sequences with Ellie are crucial. They make us feel like we know the man, even though we don't see the whole picture. So the whole sequence where she meets these guys is lifted straight from the game. Everything from how they describe their people.
From a larger group. Women, children. They're all very, very hungry.
I'm from a large group too. Also hungry.
To Ellie's threats.
Any sudden moves and I put one right between your eyes. Ditto for Buddy Boy.
And Ellie wanting penicillin.
Weapons, ammo, clothes.
Medicine? Like for infections.
And then Dave wanting to take shelter.
You, mind if we take some shelter from the cold?
Bring him with us.
At first, Ellie rightly distrusts these strangers. She doesn't give them a friendly greeting. She starts the conversation with a gun to their heads. And from her demeanor, Dave can tell that she has killed and will kill again. He sees her as a kindred spirit. Now, Ellie initially does not trust them, refusing to follow them back to the village and not even offering her name, even after Dave and James do.
My name is David. This is my friend James.
Offering your name is a way to humanize yourself to someone else. We saw this in episode 4 when a guy gives his name to Ellie to try to earn her mercy.
I'm Brian.
Dave gives his name as a way to earn trust and also to reveal who he is to Ellie. But Ellie withholding her name is a sign of distrust, which makes it even sweeter when she finally reveals her name and shows him who she really is.
Tell them that Ellie is a little girl who broke her finger!
Okay, so you got a glimpse of David from the game just now.
Yeah.
How did you, because someone who's never seen David from the game, how did you feel about his portrayal? I know it's like kind of out of sync a little bit and it's not quite, 4K quality, but you still got a sampling of it.
Well, it's interesting because just watching that individual snippet from the game, I felt like I would trust him more than the David that I saw in the show.
Gotcha.
There was something about the way that he was portrayed, which I thought was brilliant, by the way, but it was very clear to me that there was a lot of
Something
stuff
was amiss.
going on underneath the surface, and I immediately was like, I don't know, he seems to be saying all the right things, but I feel uncomfortable, and all of my spidey senses were just like, ugh.
Yeah, seeing the immediate comparison side by side, what was apparent to me is that the guy that we got in the game, to me, felt like someone you could actually see as a cult leader, versus the guy we got in the show felt more like a pastor, which in turn would make me think that he is someone, depending on who you are, you would trust more easily. There's something about the actor that looks more like a pastor to me. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And so depending on who you are, you might find that to be more accessible and therefore more trustworthy, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I hope I'm making some degree of sense here. I think both portrayals are interesting and good. It's been a minute since I keep saying over and over again, it's been a minute since I've played the game, so I don't remember exactly what my experience is or what my opinion is of this guy being trustworthy or not, or being suspicious. I felt like when I played it, I was always suspicious of him. There was always something off about him, just like you felt in the show.
Yeah.
That was translated. Now we can't know for sure how you would have felt, but whatever. Yeah, I guess in summary, the guy in the game just felt more like a cult leader to me from the get-go.
Sure.
Now, another major deviation from the game is the way that Dave earns her trust. In the game, it's told through combat as the two of them fight off like hordes of zombies, including a bloater. Now, during this sequence, they save one another's lives several times, and by the end of it, Ellie no longer bothers pointing a gun at his head. Now, the show, look, probably could use a few more zombies here and there, just saying, but they were wise to reinvent this as a dialogue scene, where Ellie gradually drops her guard, and so do we. He starts by telling us his story.
But when the Pittsburgh QZ fell in 17, Fireflies and Fedra, I left with a few others, and that's how I ended up with our flock.
And in the game, we do see that the Pittsburgh QZ has fallen, but that storyline was replaced with a Kansas City story in the show. Dave is presenting himself as a decent, humble man.
You're the leader?
Wasn't my choice. It was theirs, but yes.
But if you remember, just like 2 scenes ago, we saw him leaning on James for his continued support.
But I need to know you're with me.
He tells Ellie about his civilian life.
Before that, I was a teacher. Math. Taught kids about your age.
And this is when Ellie starts to let down her guard. We saw in episode 7 that Ellie had a begrudging respect for her school's leader, Captain Kwong. He tells Ellie that she can have a future, and afterwards, she parrots his words to Riley.
We're the only thing holding this all together.
In a way, Fedra kind of holds everything together.
Pastor Dave also goes on to make his people sound like victims,
We'd settle somewhere and then raiders would come, so we'd move again.
which makes them seem helpless, earning Ellie's pity, when maybe they were actually the raiders, killing and eating people before they moved on. And we see Ellie's growing trust written on Bella Ramsey's face. Small smiles, a little glint in her eye. Dave says,
I believe everything happens for a reason.
and this is a little magical. I mean, Ellie and all of us are starting to think that maybe this guy does have all the answers, that there is some mystical reason for this apocalypse. After all, Ellie is already placing blind faith in her quest. She's going to Utah because she believes that her blood will create a vaccine, and she even tried it on young Sam. And Dave has found her weak point and exploited it, just like he's exploited his followers' need for God. And this is where we get the turn, which is awesome.
That crazy man was traveling with a little girl.
Which, by the way, is also in the game.
He's a crazy man traveling with a little girl.
And this seems like a good place to mention that in this episode, Pastor Dave is a metaphor for the devil. It's not subtle.
Not the beast!
And by the way, everybody, if you like our Not the Bees gag and you want to help support our channel, we have a merch store where you can get your very own Not the Bees t-shirt. The merch store greatly helps out our channel. We'd appreciate it if you stop by and take a look at any of our high-quality t-shirts at shopzeroedition.com. We also have a Doug Father t-shirt.
I want the Doug Father t-shirt.
This top 5
I think I'm going to buy that.
Movies or shows, and lots of other high-quality
It's
products
too good.
to look at shopzeroedition.com with the link in the description. Now back to the video. So again, I'm going to generalize several stories from the Bible and the Torah about the more popular interpretation of Satan. There are several figures figures in these religious texts like the snake in the Garden of Eden, Lucifer, Hasatan the opposer, the beast in Revelations, but popular belief has kind of melded these figures into one, with theologians debating about whether or not that's actually correct.
Well, of course, there are all manner of lesser imps and demons, Pete, but the great Satan himself is red and scaly with a bifurcated tail, and he carries a hay fork.
So, disclaimer over, here is the story of the devil that is analogous to Pastor Dave. The devil was once an angel named Lucifer Morningstar, who was the greatest of all God's creations.
Right.
Lucifer led a rebellion against God along with 1/3 of the angelic host, and they were defeated and cast down to hell. Lucifer ruled in hell by turning people away from God so they would be his to torment in hell for all eternity. And the book of Revelations talks about casting this beast back into the fire and everything working out just fine.
So what's all this got to do with Pastor Dave?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Pastor Dave, like Lucifer, was not always evil. He served his students and was a regular guy. But the outbreak forced him to split from society, as Lucifer split from heaven. And Dave, by forming this radical evil way of life, took other people with him. He lies and tempts people the way Satan takes many forms to steal people's souls. Except, instead of stealing souls, Dave goes all Hannibal on you. David and James are also biblical names. James was one of Jesus' 12 disciples, and along with Peter and John, James is one of his favorites. Just like how we see James in this show has favored status with David. And David famously was the great king of the Israelites. He slew Goliath, freed his people from Philistine rule, was a great king, and one hell of a writer.
I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
In the same way, this David is the leader of his people. He brought them through great hardship, and he has a way with words.
No, I believe everything happens for a reason.
But King David was also a ruler with flaws. He once sent a man into battle just so he could marry his widow after David had already impregnated her. But King David repented of his sins, while Pastor David, like Lucifer, has not. In fact, later in the episode, David admits that something inside of him has always been evil, and that the fungus just allowed him to release his true nature.
I've always had a violent heart, but then the world ended and I was shown the truth.
And this is what the book of Revelations essentially does for the world. It reveals the truth. Disaster after disaster befalls Earth. Plagues, stars being wiped out of the sky, horses with the heads of snakes. I might have made that one up, but I'm pretty sure that's the point is, the world is wiped clean and nothing of the old world remains. And that is what's happening in The Last of Us. People can no longer hide behind civilization, and they have to reveal who they really are. Joel starts off with a gruff exterior and emotional barriers, but eventually he breaks down and accepts Ellie into his heart and becomes her new father figure.
Joel will be your father figure. He'll cut off a Gosney cap.
Very good. High five. So David is the inverse of Joel. He is someone who puts up a nice facade to mask his cruelty. He says,
Well, I found God after the apocalypse, which is either the best time or the worst time to find him. Hard to say.
But what he actually means here is he found the power of God after the apocalypse, and we see him exploit that power for his own pleasure.
The fighting is the part I like the most.
But what's most satanic about David is that, unlike Kathleen or Phaedra, he gains power through lies and deceit. This goes back to our themes of trust and faith. David gets Ellie to trust him. Even when he releases her,
So you're just gonna let her get away?
it's actually a trap.
When the sun rises, I'll lead a group out to pick up her trail.
He knows they can track her back to the house, and he figures that she can't move a sick man. And all of this was foreshadowed by Maria's parting words to Ellie.
Be careful who you put your faith in. The only people who can betray us are the ones we trust.
When David returns to the resort, there's another big cannibal clue when they serve dinner.
What is it?
Venison.
But we know that it's not venison because they literally just took the deer. It hasn't even been dressed yet. Even the fact that she has
I was
to
a little
ask
tricked in
what
that
it
moment.
is, that's a big clue.
Yeah.
Silent breed is people!
And next, there's an interesting scene in the dining hall.
You should kill him. You should kill both of them.
Yeah, why does he hit her in the face like that?
Now, he hits her for a couple reasons. One, he's already decided that he wants Ellie for himself. But two, he's the only one who gets to decide who lives and who dies. Later, David says,
I'm a shepherd surrounded by sheep.
but he's actually a wolf among his sheep, and he wants to make sure that it stays that way. It's also appropriate that the daughter's name is Hannah because Hannah means grace. And then he slaps her in the face. So grace is what God offers to the human race in place of punishment. And if Pastor Dave is the devil, his way is the antithesis of grace. Just as he wants to be a father figure to Ellie, that will be the antithesis of Joel. He tells her,
But the truth is, Hannah, you will always have a father.
And he's not talking about God here. He's talking about himself. This scene is great on a rewatch because it shows you what was under the surface in that opening scene. No one here is happy because they all have to eat people. Okay, Ellie injects the world's greatest penicillin into Joel's wound.
Where do we get penicillin from?
Fungus.
And outside, she knows that the bad guys are coming because she sees the birds flying away. Now, when it's obvious that Joel is not going to wake up, Ellie has to become the protector. Now, we've talked about this all season, how a major theme of the show is how people show love. Specifically, how some people, like Joel or Bill, show love through protection. And now that role has been inverted, with Ellie protecting Joel from these horse murdering a-holes.
Enough to kill a horse.
What's wrong killing horses?
The scene unfolds pretty much like it does in the game, with Ellie leaving Joel in the basement, getting the horse shot out from under her, and then being taken prisoner. Now, once she's prisoner, the men want to kill her, and David drops another bit of foreshadowing.
You so hungry for vengeance? Deliver it.
Oh, because they were going to eat Ellie.
That's right. So Joel comes to just in time to ambush the wrong guy in the wrong basement. The guy passes out with blood in his teeth, another way to foreshadow the cannibalism reveal. And I just want to say that as soon as this guy entered the basement, I thought of a cannibalism storyline from The Walking Dead, when the heroes were kidnapped by cannibals and all seems lost, and Rick just says,
"Fucking with the wrong people."
That is one of the best moments in that show. We go straight from Joel lying on the floor to Ellie on the floor, and David says,
I started worrying you wouldn't wake up.
This is again showing us inverted roles. The episode begins with Ellie worried that Joel won't wake up because she was his protector. But now David is trying to take over that protector role from Ellie. And this in particular is a scene that takes on a whole new meaning when you realize that David is a secret Satan. When Ellie wakes up, David does not want to punish her. He wants her to worship him. First, he tries to force her gratitude.
Did you hear me say the others want to kill you?
But Ellie resists.
Yeah.
But I stopped them.
Yeah.
Now, because Ellie does not cave in right away, it shows that she is powerful, and that makes David want her even more.
And all I want is an equal.
He tells her that what he wants is her trust, and her trust is just another word for faith. He even implies that if she doesn't give him her faith, then she will live a life of torment.
But if you can't find a way to trust me, then yes, you are alone.
This whole scene has its roots in the book of Matthew, when Jesus fasted in the desert and was tempted by Satan. And this was dramatized perfectly by Martin Scorsese in The Last Temptation of Christ. So when you even see these scenes side by side, you see they're very similar. Ellie is trapped in a cell while Willem Dafoe's Jesus is inside a protective circle. In this scene, Satan tempts Jesus 3 times, offering him companionship, power, and the kingdom of heaven. And David, very similarly, makes 3 offers to Ellie. He offers to save Joel if she joins him.
I can tell the others to stop looking for him.
Then he offers her the chance to run the town with him.
Think of what we could do together. We'd grow, spread out.
Which is pretty specifically paraphrased from the Bible when Satan offers Jesus kingdoms on earth to rule.
Your heart is so greedy. You said it was God, but you really wanted power.
While David is essentially offering Ellie a chance to rule his kingdom at his side.
They follow me, and they would follow us.
He even gives her the old, "we're not so different, you and I" speech.
And you know what I see when I look at you?
Yeah.
You remind me of me.
You and I are nuts.
We're not so different, you and I. Are we so different, you and I?
Our methods have not differed as much as you pretend.
We're not so different, you and I, Lieutenant.
The scene also has a monologue that really summarizes the...
That line is used over and over and over and over and over again. It's kind of hilarious because it's such a trope. Just as much as it's a trope for the villain to explain his plan, which is a necessary component of movies, you actually need that scene where the villain explains his situation.
Yeah, we need to know.
But the line of, "we're not so different," I am kind of sick of it. It slipped right by me on Last of Us.
No, but I think this is just how diabolical that character is, because I feel like, yeah, what you're saying and what he pointed out, yeah, it does happen a lot in movies, but I feel like this is a tactic that is often used in life as well. If you're trying to manipulate someone and get them on side, maybe not even manipulate, but just try and, bring someone over to your side.
But it's almost verbatim.
Yeah.
We're not so different, you and
Sure,
I.
sure. The act of what he's trying to do, which is, create a link.
A bond, yeah. I do appreciate him making that parallel with the temptations that Jesus had to endure in the desert. Just for full transparency, I'm far removed from Catholicism, but the stories are still interesting, right? To make the comparison of him pulling the same stunt as the devil on the savior of humanity is very, very interesting.
That is so interesting. I really love how Ryan Airy goes deep into these Christian parallels, because I would never have thought about it. But when he breaks it down like that, I'm like, oh yeah. And when you said, she's the savior of humanity, I'm like, Oh my God.
Yeah.
I had not thought about that.
Well, what's even more curious to me is whether or not that was intentional, but who knows?
The scene also has a monologue that really summarizes the theme of the game and the show when he describes cordyceps. He kind of reveres the fungus, saying that it caused his religious conversion.
But then the world ended and I was shown the truth.
Right. By God.
No. But cordyceps.
He goes on to say,
It's fruitful, it multiplies.
and this is paraphrased from the book of Genesis, when God commanded his creations to go forth
and multiply.
And finally, he says,
It loves.
And the show's co-creator Craig Mazin has said as much in the Last of Us podcast when he was discussing Tessa's romantic kiss with the zombie.
The fungus loves too.
So Mazin's point was that the fungus, like all life, is trying to propagate as an act of love. And a recurring theme in the show is that people show love in different ways. Like I said, for Bill and Joel, it's protection, but for Frank, it's different.
Paying attention to things. It's how we show love.
And this is where I disagree a bit with the showrunner's take. The fungus does not love, it reacts. It is a stimulus and a response. If you want to anthropomorphize a plant, then you can say that a tree loves the sun, sure. But a tree can't feel actual love. It is just committing an act of photosynthesis.
Sure, but could you argue that the entire natural world is just one single act of love?
But see, Doug, the fungus is not love, it's assault. This fungus spreads with no regard for any other life. And this is alluded to when Ellie calls him an animal and he says,
Well, yes, we all are. That's sort of the point.
And this...
God, man.
What?
He accidentally did my head in just now. The dog did my head in because the whole thing could just be basically the same as photosynthesis. If you extrapolate the function of tree and sunlight, like how are we any different? And it's like, what is love at that point but a chain reaction?
But like
to propagate.
The thing that he was saying, like that whole argument, because I thought about that after the episode ended. David is saying, but we are all animals. And what do animals do? Animals like eat other animals, right? And we're not that different. But then I thought about
you
it.
You and I.
Yeah, you and I. And I thought about it as I was getting ready for bed, and I was like, but isn't the whole point of us being human is that somehow, and maybe this is because we're like super pretentious animals, but we're like, no, we're elevated. We're better than that. We don't do that, you know?
That's what I'm saying. Maybe not. That's what I'm saying.
But then I don't think that too many animals are actually cannibals as well. Do you know what I mean? I'm not.
The cannibalism,
I'm not sure
you take that part out of it. That's not part of the conversation at this moment. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the function of survival. And the tree light to the sunlight, or excuse me, the tree to the sunlight, you get what I'm saying, is not far off from like what, you know, each other, gravitating towards each other and making a little version of ourselves.
So like our need to survive is love, or is it that it's not
I think love is a word we have assigned it with some abstract meaning in order to disassociate from the fact that it's just a function at the end of the day. You ever hear a mom say, oh my God, I didn't know I could love this. It's like instantly I just loved this baby that came out of my vagina, right? It's like, well, that's because of a biological trick, so you don't fucking eat it. Like it's, that's not my joke, that's Joe Rogan's joke.
So you don't smash it against the wall when it starts crying.
Yeah, it's like there's a trick that happens in your body where you suddenly you have like more energy for the baby than ever before, to the point of like killing yourself to make sure this thing survives. Like, what is love? This whole existential thing.
Love is a trick.
I just got bombed by this existential dog, so it just killed me.
Oh, Dougie.
The point that Ryan is making, which is like, that's not love, it's assault. Yes, that's assault, but the idea that cordyceps can love, it's not that different, you and I. You know what I'm saying? It's not that different from humans.
You've joined Pastor David's cult.
That's what's breaking me. No, I didn't. I'm just saying it's like, well, is it really that different? The way that infected person assaulted Tess.
Yeah.
It's like, what do we do to cows? What do we do to animals in general? We kill them. We don't use the whole buffalo, you know.
Unless you're Native American.
Yeah, we take
we
take what we want from them in order for us to survive, and so that's
we are literally the worst.
So cordyceps are doing what they do for their survival, so they can propagate.
Yeah,
it's messed up, but so are we. So it's like, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Anyway, I'm broken. Okay.
This is the real theme of The Last of Us game and show. It's about how the human race has been wiped out by a fungus, which in turn has caused us to lose our humanity. On a micro level, we see this with Joel. Following the death of Sarah, he did terrible things to survive. And on a macro level, we see that places like Kansas City are consumed with hatred until they are literally consumed by cordyceps. And this is like how Dave's flock is consumed by fear, so they in turn consume people. Just like the cordyceps, they now consume human flesh, displaying how they have lost their humanity. Like most animals animals in nature, the cordyceps simply respond to stimuli.
Hey.
Not you, buddy, you're great. And we see this in Pastor David's animal-like behavior.
And it secures its future with violence if it must.
But the difference between the fungus and humanity is that the cordyceps has to kill and humans choose to kill. But the most important thing about Satan in stories is that he's always used to show the inverse of God. For example, instead of showing people grace, he punishes, which is indicative when he literally slaps a girl whose name means grace. And in this show, Pastor Dave is shown to be the inverse of Joel. At first, he tells Ellie that he wants to be a father to her.
I've decided you do need a father.
But through the bars of the prison, we see that what he actually wants is to sexually assault her.
Yep.
Fighting is the part I like the most.
Then we shift right to the scene where Joel tortures these guys. It's also straight out of the game.
You're gonna mark it on the map. And it better be the exact same spot your buddy points to.
And this is where Joel shows that he is the opposite of the fungus. The fungus kills because it has to. Joel is killing to protect Ellie. But really, I think he's kind of enjoying it.
Yes.
Just like in the game, Joel finds Ellie's backpack and then the boathouse filled with dead bodies. We won't show one here so we don't get demonetized. So then they're about to chop up Ellie. And by the way, it's pretty appropriate that she's fighting cannibals in a kitchen and dining hall, right? So the dialogue and shot selection are all taken straight from the game.
I'm infected! I'm infected!
In the dining hall, she starts a fire, just like in the game, and just like in the Kansas City finale, fire is a metaphor for rage. Rage is like the fungus. It eats, it consumes, it destroys, just like fire. David is also completely unbothered by the fire and doesn't care if the whole lodge burns down. Again, we're hitting the Satanism symbolism pretty hard here.
Yeah. What is this guy, a Dark Funeral album? Right, man, it's a metal band. Get hip.
So the whole sequence of Ellie versus David is also taken straight from the game. It's a stealth mission where you have to slowly injure him. Although the big difference between Ellie and Joel is that Joel doesn't scream right before he stabs someone. Then he tries to assault her, and we see how much he's actually adopted the cordyceps warped version of love. He takes pleasure
but Ellie's
in
screaming in that moment actually worked to her advantage because he went like
Ellie
that
him off
and she ducked down and got him in the stomach.
Comfortably long time, a lot like in the game. I also thought that there was a parallel here with another scene with a cannibal in Silence of the Lambs.
If you like
what the hell?
Ellie frees herself from hell and enters the world outside. Joel, for some reason, sneaks up on her and freaks her out.
No!
It sneaks up on her for some reason. I did think about that afterwards. I was like, just like later on in the dead of the night, I was like ready to go to bed. I'm like, why did he sneak up on her instead of saying, hey, Ellie? You know, he just grabbed her. It's like, you know who that is. There's not that many people in this place that look like her from behind.
She just needed a tight hug.
Right.
You know?
But it's just curious. Like, why did he sneak up on her?
I know.
You know?
Whereas like in the game, he pulls her off of David, but like that's a minor nitpicking point. As he leaves her, he says,
It's okay, baby girl.
Now this kind of fatherly intonation is so sweet because it shows how much he has finally accepted her and is coping with Sarah's death. But also, just to really nail down the biblical symbolism, it's showing how Ellie has been saved from Satan by a father figure.
Joe will be your father figure. He's a kind of Jesse Custer.
Jesse Custer.
Yeah, man, it's like a hidden reference in the video for people to go look up. Jessica?
As usual, I really, really enjoyed that. I had not thought about all of the Christian parallels and how much David was like Satan, but now I'm like, okay, yeah, I see that. And that's interesting. And I'm just so curious. After breaking down all of that and finding all of these different parallels, like he said, like with the name Hannah and all of that, I'm like, wait a second, did the writers actually do this? Is this on purpose or is
it's
this
entirely
like,
possible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think these things are thought through pretty hard, and I don't recall anything about those people in the video game. I have to keep prefacing this with, it's been a minute since I played the game because people will come after me in the comments for stating the wrong thing. That whole scene where David and Ellie are fighting off hordes of clickers and whatever, I completely forgot about that. And so for me, watching the show, I'm like, this feels like a really good translation of the game. We hung out with Andrew the other day and he's like, oh, yo, didn't you like miss out on that whole part where they're, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. The way it works in the game actually makes sense to me because it's in an urgent situation like that you would learn how to trust someone.
Well, yeah.
Because you have to lean on them for your own survival. It transitions your relationship from like strangers into being comrades for the moment.
Yeah, and I can totally see how that works, how that is actually a really good story, like a story point, because...
story function.
Yeah, because it's not just violence for violence's sake. It's not just a scene where they get to shoot up a bunch of infected. It's actually serving to move the story forward.
Exactly.
Because instead of having a dialogue scene where he's trying to influence her through words, he's actually showing her through action that he is someone that she can trust.
Yeah.
And I can totally see how that would be very effective at lowering whatever walls you had put up where you're like, I don't trust you, to now like, oh, we nearly died and we got through this together, so I trust you now.
Yeah, I feel like the show's approach is more about the fallout of the infected and not so much about dealing with the infected. Because the game is more head-on dealing with the infected throughout your journey. Yes, you're dealing with the fallout in other ways with these like little pockets of people. The thing is, like, the show's, it feels like the show's done away with the infected for most of the show. And so you're mostly dealing with the consequences more than the action.
Sure.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how I'm going to feel like long term, because having watched multiple Disney Plus shows at this point, often the issue I have with the Disney Plus shows is it feels very truncated, like just a summary, like a footnotes episode as opposed to a full lived in episode, kind of like Andor. You know, Andor feels lived in, like you really feel that journey, and I really appreciate it. And I'm wondering if at the end of Last of Us, would I actually revisit this? I'm starting to like question my opinion of the show, what I have been feeling. I'm like, because sometimes, like right after we finished filming, there was a part of me that was just sort of sitting with the thoughts going, how much did I actually like that? I wish these episodes were longer and went in deeper and whatnot, because they're like 50, 45 minutes. And I'm like, but why, not Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones is like an hour long each, isn't it? Like, why are these shorter? Why isn't there more story being explored here? Obviously, I'm going to hold that opinion until we've watched episode 9 and like I can get the whole thing and simmered in there. But yeah, I'm already starting to wonder how I'm going to feel about the whole thing. The acting, the writing, the direction, all of it's quite strong, but I think my one complaint that I've been kind of feeling is I just wish there was more explored, especially with the infected.
Sure.
So, anyways, you guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Let us know your feelings in the comments below. I'm Jabby Koi. This is
ACHARA KIRK.
Peace out.